Welcome to the Midwestern Legislative Conference, Great Lakes St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus webinar, hosted by the Caucus's Nutrient Management Task Force. We are all experts at Zooming by now, but just a reminder, we encourage active participation in this webinar. You can raise your hand as a participant, you can type in the chat pane, or just unmute yourself and ask a question. If not asking a question, please keep your computer on mute to minimize background noise like barking dogs and your phone ringing, which is what occurs to me. In the end, Representative David Abbott will be moderating this program. Representative Abbott?
Thank you, Carol. It's a pleasure to be here today. Just a little bit about myself. I represent District 82 of the state of Indiana, which is the great Northeast Lake Country area, part of our state. I represent about 5 different counties, and our hearts and prayers go out to Jacques and his family as he gets over COVID. As you know, we've been filling in for him since he's been off. We had the Maumee Bay conference that was scheduled back in August, which we had to cancel because of the COVID. But we've decided we did the 2 virtuals. This is the second of 2 conferences that we're going to have virtually. And I'd like to just get started by just telling you a little bit about what we're going to do today. First of all, let me start out just saying that this being the second in the virtual series, it focuses on a topic that hits all parts of the nation: federal funding for water projects on private lands. Farmers and ranchers manage over 1.4 billion acres in the U.S. here in the Midwest. Much of that is commodity crops like corn, soybeans, and dairy. For more than 80 years, employees of the Soil Conservation Service, renamed in 1994 as the NRCS, have worked to maintain healthy working landscapes. Since the 1994 Farm Bill, the NRCS has had a growing responsibility to administer financial assistance for conservation programs. Over the last 2 decades, there's been a proliferation of programs that give landowners a way to protect our nation's natural resources. For this reason, we of the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus feel it is important that we understand what efforts are underway. We do encourage participation and discussion because that is how we learn the best. So please plan on active participation. Please note that, like all of our meetings, the session is being recorded and the video will be posted later on the website. Also, you can, in addition to raising your hand, as Carolyn had said, you can also text. The number is 859-265-0658. So if you want to text your questions, also you also have the ability to do that. Today, our speaker has more than 20 years experience across the nation, helping administer the NRCS programs. During her 23 years with the NRCS, Lori Zaire has served in technical positions such as rangeland management, specialist and agronomist, and in addition to technology and leadership positions. She also served as acting ASTC for management and strategy in Louisiana and acting state conservationist in Montana. She's finally made it to God's country in the Midwest. She is from Texas and now serves as the acting state conservationist here in Ohio. It's with great pleasure that I can introduce Lori Zaire. And with that, I want to turn the meeting over to you, Lori, if you want to take over from here. You've got the microphone.
Yes, thank you so much. Let me share my screen. And that looks right. So thank you, Representative Abbott. I am so honored to be here and to be able to present this information to you. I come to you as the acting state conservationist from Ohio on a detail, and I may be bringing you a little bit different perspective as I worked in many other states and am not there in the Great Lakes region. All the while, although I've learned a ton while I'm there, this effort is really been a group of all of the state conservationists, the 8 state conservationists in the Great Lakes region and their staff, a whole collaboration. So if you guys don't know your state conservationists, I encourage you to reach out But this task force, you guys are really great. This is the kind of collaboration that we strive for. Again, I am so encouraged and honored that you would find our work valuable enough to have us on. So I am very pleased and honored. And I also want to thank Carolyn Orr. She's been a joy to work with and a pleasure in getting this put together, as well as a couple of folks on my staff, Brooke DeCubelis and Mark Smith. They are tasked directly with working on the Ohio Lake Erie side, and they do a great job. So all of us are available for you. That's what we do. And I know that it is hard to listen for an hour, and the term death by PowerPoint didn't originate by accident. So I encourage you definitely to text, ask questions. I will try and remember to pause in between each of these topics. So we'll have plenty of time for questions and comments, discussions, versus me just talking at you. So we'll jump right into it though. I did view the last Zoom meeting you guys had on water infrastructure, and I'm fully aware that you guys do know the scope of the issue. So we all know this important resource area is extremely valued for recreation, providing economic benefits from fishing and recreation, and providing drinking water for over 50 million people. The Great Lakes region is also a major ag area with more than 55 million acres of land under production. So balancing those needs of all these different stakeholders while building the resiliency of the region is so difficult and a worthwhile endeavor, but it takes so much time, partners, and resources. And we at NRCS, I can tell you, are just honored to be a part of that endeavor and to build off of what's already been accomplished, to look forward to future opportunities and to work together towards a health and resiliency of the region where we can. So we know there are many agencies across the 2 nations and the 8 states working to protect this natural resource, and NRCS does play a vital role in that. And I am so happy to be talking to you about this today. And I'm going to kind of give you our role and reasoning, and we're going to end up in a deep dive on the programs that you guys have asked to learn about. But you've got to understand the basics of it and why we're doing what we're doing, or it doesn't really make sense. So bear with me. We, NRCS, we work putting conservation on private lands through a cooperative conservation delivery system. So we work directly with soil and water conservation districts. We have offices in almost every county. We are also locally led, and that's really important. So each conservation district utilizes a locally led process, including local work groups comprised of local stakeholders and landowners, and they hold public meetings seeking input for programs and workload priorities. We also then scale that up and host a state technical advisory committee to advise on statewide and regional activities and priorities. So we're proactive in seeking input and guidance to address scalable priority needs. I like to think of it as we have a couple of different mechanisms here. We'll talk about initiatives and putting funding, and we talk about the Great Lakes region. But we have 2 things. We've got some reactivity going on, and we can be proactive. So that locally led process, where we have that presence in each county and have our standard programs in each county, allows us to solve those local problems before they become large regional ones. It allows those people that are really close to the ground to say, hey, I see we've got this invasive species, or for some reason, this area has a whole bunch of wells that need to be decommissioned and plugged because it's causing some water quality issues. And we can address those locally before they become a widespread issue. So if it wasn't for that, who knows how many scalable resource things we would have. And then we also have not necessarily reactive, but a way to address those challenges that are already existing through initiatives and those larger scalable priorities. So I feel like that's important. And we do utilize a systematic, individualized approach. So everything we do is based off of working one-on-one with private landowners to determine in their own situations, including their economic standpoint, we have to consider their operators, their goals, their economic factors in long-term voluntary conservation planning. And we are science-based. Everything we do is using proven science to guide our actions and decisions. But we also know that things don't stay status quo, right? Not only do we learn new things and science change, but our ecosystems, our situations change as well. We've got to adapt as markets change, landowners change, sizes of farms, technology changes, all of it, we need to adapt as well. So let's talk nutrient load reduction strategies. We know the key to nutrient load reduction is not a specific conservation practice, but rather a systematic approach. So working with producers to apply a suite of conservation practices that are specifically focused on improving that water quality in the priority watersheds. We use 3 principles to select conservation practices from: avoid, control, and trap. We really want to keep those nutrients on the field, doing their job where they need to be. But at the last resort, we want to trap them from leaving the edge of the field and potentially entering the watershed. So we need to have that multifaceted approach in order to choose those practices. And those are also grounded on 4 principles. And these principles are not only good for nutrient load reduction strategies, it's important to consider other comparable associated resource concerns that are being addressed along the way. There's climate benefits, wildlife benefit, on-farm production, and economic benefits. And those can be really important for us to consider when we move into the program discussion or when you're thinking strategic planning in nutrient management. So in order to prevent erosion, which carries away valuable topsoil and nutrients, NRCS incentivizes practices that work to anchor the soil in place, improve water infiltration by slowing that water down, and improving soil health by increasing the organic matter in the soil profile. For nutrient management, we do adhere to the 4R concept. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but it's the right time, the right place, the right rate, and the right source. And this is going to vary for each individual operations and their goals and what they're doing. So all of those things can shift and be tailored to that specific. Edge of field data shows that when the highest levels of phosphorus occur in surface runoff. So we work with producers to trap dissolved sediment-bound phosphorus before it leaves the field by using drainage water management, wetlands, edge of field buffers to filter and improve overall water quality before it can discharge into the streams. Soil health is ever increasing in importance, and by increasing the organic matter in soil and reducing soil compaction, NRCS conservation practices help to increase the ability of the soil to absorb and hold that water as well as filter the soil water. So this is going to reduce the amount of water leaving the field and improve nutrient efficiency of the crop. All right, let me pause there before moving into some program principles and before we really get into the actual programs. So if there's any questions now, I'm not sure I can see hands raised, but if there is any, by all means, let me know. In all of these practices that I just talked about, and I didn't get into a lot of the specifics, but what we're looking at, they benefit the land, which is important to the operator, and the watershed, which is important to all the stakeholders and constituents. There are some things like buffers that are edge of field that may take land out of production that we need to think a little bit harder about from a landowner perspective. Really good practices, we want to promote those, but they may need a little bit extra encouragement, things like that. And these are only examples. We have over 170 conservation practices that we can put on in plans directly for individuals in those situations. And we also have the ability to be flexible and create interim practices. So we know that they need to be specific to each site. They can be single practices, they can be multiple, but what we want to do is either solve those big problems or help folks go to a higher level of threshold, if you will. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll move on. All right, we're just getting started anyway. So we have developed approaches with federal, state, and private partners to better target conservation for improving water quality in the Great Lakes region. We need some of these, tools to sell conservation. So we're capitalizing on voluntary interest shown by regional producers, utilizing partnerships and trying to put in incentives and education and other tools. So we do, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, we work one-on-one with producers to develop a plan tailored to their operation and goals, and also increase their productivity and protect the value of their land. We help them enact that plan through both technical and financial assistance. So the best planners are the best listeners, right? We need to listen and find out what each landowner cares about, and then figure out where those cares and concerns overlap with that broader perspective, that larger perspective. The landowners need to have ownership in whatever it is that they're going to do. So we can meet those local needs of the individual, which is really important for sustainability, right? As well as meeting those larger perspectives. So we've got to keep these different scalable things in mind while we're working with private lands. And we've got to make it sustainable. Money talks. Incentives are great, but when they end those practices, we want that conservation and those changes in management or those vegetation things to continue and to be considered in their future. So whatever we plan needs to be economical and sustainable to them. And they also need to know why they do it. We need to educate along the way. Everybody, the public and the landowners, everybody needs to understand why people do what they're doing it, or else people won't do it. So on this slide, you're going to see Mr. Dwayne Statler of the Ohio Blanchard River Demonstration Farm speaking with one of our engineers, Greg Wells, about the conservation and economic benefits of this mortality composter that he just installed with NRCS technical and financial assistance that provides huge water quality benefits. Very good practice. So we not only use science-based information to inform our decisions, but we also partner with academic and research partners to ensure that our conservation implementation along the way is using the most effective solutions. So Dr. Kevin King above, or you're looking at him, is looking at edge of field watering samples sites, both surface and subsurface. So we use this information to ensure that our conservation practices are functioning as intended, as well as adjust or tweak them to meet those local needs. So we're always planning, we're always looking for more information, and we're always adaptable. So we want those benefits to be long-term and realized. So this is really looking at the edge of field. So this is really important and a good tool when we're working with landowners, because the goal is to keep things on their particular land. But what's also important for us as planners and conservationists is to look at a larger scale. So we've got scales within scales. So we want to look at the watershed scale. So we utilize findings from the Multi-Agency Conservation Effects Assessment Project, SEEP we call it because we like acronyms. And this is a team of more than 30 scientists in the basin that analyzes and runs models on conservation practices at a watershed scale. So the focus isn't necessarily on the edge of field, but at the end of the watershed to make sure that what we're doing within that is really positively impacting the watershed. And they are modeling actual practices using scientifically proven methods that's pulled up in court, if you will. But they actually are, there's a lot of ground truthing, and they aren't just doing a model based on inferences, but they're doing that model based on what's actually on the ground at the time. So it's really important information for us. And those are some of the tools that we use to help give us assistance when we're talking to landowners, so that they know what we're doing is proven and effective, and they can see that data, especially the edge of the field. But we also have a few other tools and tricks because it takes quite a bit. So regulatory certainty for ag producers. We work with regulators so that agricultural producers can have certainty that the voluntary conservation systems that they implement are consistent and current with potential regulation, as well as sustained agricultural production. And I know that's a mouthful, so let me explain that. So for instance, the NRCS Working Lands for Wildlife program, the agency works with ag producers to create and improve wildlife habitat with regulatory predictability from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. So remember I told you to think about those comparable concerns. Most wildlife practices are also really good water quality practices. It is all relevant. It's a valid tool that can be used for a multitude of concerns, because we know that the majority of T&E species through the Endangered Species Act occur on private land. So if we can work with the regulators and reduce some of that risk of having those species on their land and help provide that good habitat and that good conservation, we can give them that regulatory predictability, which makes landowners more comfortable and a whole lot more ready to adopt these conservation practices without the fear of being regulated in the future. So it's a win-win, and it maintains voluntary. It's proven. I love it. So
I have a text question, Lori. What do you mean remains compliant? Can you go back one slide? The question asked, what do you mean remains compliant? What does that mean to the landowner?
It means that their conservation plan and what they've agreed to do through the Working Lands for Wildlife program is compliant with the regulations. So any other potential, what they're doing, they get locked in and they remain compliant with either current and potential regulation based on what they've agreed to do to sustain their agriculture production and maintain that habitat. Does that make sense? So they have less fear of somebody coming in and like take, with the Endangered Species Act. So they don't have to worry about, if they get their predictability, they don't have to worry about somebody coming in on top of that. So I hope that clears that up, but thank you, great question. Okay. All right. So we need all those tools to assist us.
One more, I'm sorry, one more.
No, you're good, you're good.
What size watershed are you referring to when you say watershed scale? I guess that matters whether you're Texas or Indiana or Ohio, but
it absolutely does.
What are you referring to?
So let me go back to that slide of, sorry, this is a little clunky, but let me just go back this way. I might've missed it. Oh, I don't have it in here yet. So I'm talking about like the watershed, like the WLEB, a Lake Erie Basin. And I can answer that later, easier when there's a slide that comes up further. Sorry for clicking through these. Right here. So yeah, we're talking a larger basin watershed. And let me hold that and address it a little bit later. Any other questions?
We have others, but we'll wait. Go ahead.
Okay, good deal. All right, no problem at all. So those are just some of the tools that we have to help us sell conservation, but it is really hard for folks to take risks considering that this is their livelihoods and it impacts their families and their businesses. So we have learned that demonstration farms are an excellent tool. I can't speak highly enough of them. It's actual farmers agreeing to participate as demonstration farms and allow other farmers and ranchers to come and see what they're doing. So see the improvements of conservation directly, ask questions with those farmers at field days or one-on-one. So they get more comfortable with the changes in management. So those that took the risk first can lessen the risks for others by letting them see that and teaching them the right ways. And as well as I do that you're more likely to participate or buy something from somebody that is actually living it and walking that talk, not just talking the talk. So it is a huge, good tool. So we have what's called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative with NRCS. And through that, we've, you'll see on the right-hand side, there's six different demonstration farm networks in Wisconsin alone that now exist. So each network demonstrates the best and leading edge conservation practices to reduce phosphorus. We have over 30 farms implementing conservation practices like no-till, cover crops, low disturbance manure, nutrient management, soil health, all sorts of really good practices that farmers can come and learn from on their own. And that is just Wisconsin. And you'll see Derek Van de Hey on the slide, and he is a demonstration farm network participant. He has 2,500 acres of crops and 250 head of cattle. He's been doing a lot of no-till farming and planting cover crops and allowing folks to come on and do that demonstration. Now, do you see that picture? That's his cover crops. And can you, do you see the radish tubers on there? Can you visualize how those tubers in the ground could impact not only organic matter, but water infiltration? It's a great tool. And having folks see that and put their hands on it is a really great is a really great selling tool. And it shows, and it also helps productivity, right? And we have people telling that story themselves. And that is just Wisconsin. We have demonstration farms and networks in each of the states. That's just an example. So I will acknowledge that NRCS is a small federal agency. So even though we have a presence nationwide in almost every county, and we do phenomenal work, I love it. I wouldn't change my career for anything, but we don't and can't even come close to meeting the existing needs that are out there. So without our partners, the programmatic educational outreach successes that we've achieved in the Great Lakes region, it just wouldn't be possible. So for example, we work with industry. In this instance, the 4R nutrient stewardship certification. So we've worked with a lot of different partners in that 4R, the right timing, the right place, the right rate, the right source, all that good nutrient management stuff has become a certification process. So certified crop advisors can now go and get a certified 4R nutrient stewardship, and it's just one more credibility. And you can see all those blue areas that it's just taken off. So all of that good conservation is being promoted by partners. And it's just a great tool. Okay, let me pause and take some questions.
Okay, the question on here is, how does your office use the water quality data or CEAP results to measure performance of your office programs and projects?
Okay, for CEAP, so we get those results. In fact, that is a good question. So we use them two ways. So we're looking at, when we get those, we're looking at what we've done and which conservation practices work, but we also use them more proactively. So it's more on a practice in a regional scale. But we also use them proactively in the fact that we look at what areas the conservation practices that are implemented make the most difference. So if you look at the CEAP results, you'll see overall in which watershed had so many, I actually have a slide with some of the results of some of the CEAP results. But what we can also do is which land uses make the biggest difference. And so we use them, we measure what we've done, and then we use it to tweak where we're going to go as far as priorities. We know ultimately the goal is to have 100% of the watershed covered with conservation and zero watershed, but we know that we're not there yet, and we know we've got a long way to go. And that's going to be, things change and people change and operations change. So we're always going to be a moving target. That said, we know where we need to prioritize, what soils are the most vulnerable, which operations and land uses are the most vulnerable where we can target. So I hope that answers that question.
I guess it says, are these results linked to your strategic plans?
Yes. Yes.
That's quick and easy.
Yes, that's an absolute yes. So yes, everything we place, especially in the Great Lakes region. So full disclosure, there are some regions. So the CEAP process is long and arduous because it is on those specifics. If we're just talking CEAP alone, it is just on. It is using real conservation, like I said, and they're modeling that, and then it's ground truth. It's the kind of document that holds up in court, and it's very tedious. I actually have supervised some of that CEAP process myself, so I'm extremely familiar with it. And it's very valuable, but it takes time and it's delayed. So we use it as a tool of what we've done and where we're going. We have other tools that we use as far as shorter. So we use those. I know I'm getting my words mixed up. Sorry. So we use CEAP on a watershed scale to plan for those things and to prioritize those land uses and where we're going to target, and to make sure that our conservation practices are working and where we need to work those. But we have other tools that we use for the interim in between, because it takes several years to get those data out. So it's a combination, and we can get I mean, if you guys want to know how we plan, we can, but yes, definitely we're using that long-term data and that edge of field data as well in our strategic planning. Okay, any more questions?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm about to move into a discussion on financial assistance programs, but all of the planning and assistance that we have discussed is really separate from the financial assistance and stands alone. So we offer planning services and the demonstration farm visits, regardless of participation in financial assistance programs. We truly must do that for our program work to be successful. So in an ideal world, we do full-scale conservation plans with a producer and then talk with the producer about opportunities available to assist in implementing that plan. But in the real world, people hear about funding, so they come in and then we take them to and start walking the land with them and doing that plan, and then we work with them on the right way to implement those. There are different sources of funding. We have a lot of different programs, and all of those that have different criteria, and all of those are so important in helping producers on a conservation journey, no matter where they are, whether they're just starting, fully established, a great conservationist already, or really need some assistance along the way. There are programs there to meet all those needs. Okay, so again, we like to use acronyms, so get ready. EQIP, which is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. All of our programs are voluntary. No one is forced into participation, but once we do go into an incentive program contract or a financial assistance program contract, we do require certain conservation thresholds to be met prior to funding. EQIP is our largest program. Think about a single resource concern or challenge. For example, somebody has massive erosion and runoff and needs a grassed waterway, or they have need a nutrient management plan. It could also be multiple issues, but we can come in and do those management, structural, vegetative practices, and it's a short time solve. So we're going to solve those resource concerns in a short amount of time, fix those issues or challenges to a threshold level. And then that contract is short. They're generally a couple of years or just as soon as they're done. So hopefully we've educated and the producers maintain that along the way. They're based, we offer incentive rates. So they're not 100% and it's not cost share. We usually offer, it's based on about 50 to 75% of the estimated actual cost of certain cost categories. We can't pay for certain things statutorily, but it's generally 50 to 75%, so that the landowner has some buy-in and some ownership and will want to maintain that. We also have some higher rates, up to 90% for historically underserved folks. Economics is tough out there, though. Our landowners, they struggle, and especially now with the economy like it is. So, you know, with the ups and downs, conservation is generally one of the first things to go when you're trying to make ends meet. So it is an important tool to help take that risk off. And sometimes you need to have higher payment rates, and sometimes you can get by with lower, just depending. So we try to flex that to meet the needs and maximize federal funds. And it all starts with a plan. So on this slide, you'll see Bissar Dwayne. She is a producer who utilized our EQIP program to extend her growing season, utilize cover crops so she could grow fresh fruits and vegetables. And she's actually a refugee that came over from Cambodia in the 80s and has really built a successful agribusiness. And we've enjoyed providing technical and financial assistance to her. Okay, now not to get complicated. So EQIP was first authorized in the 1996 Farm Bill. So that was 25 years ago. So it's been reauthorized and modified since then. So you know it's successful and it's a great tool. And as we get bigger and better, things change and we add to, and it continues to be a fabulous tool. But you know as well as I do that the longer something stays and the more bells and whistles that gets placed on it, we create these niches. And that's because it is valuable. So when you start looking at it overall, it may look complicated, but that's because everybody sees the value, and we've carved up all these niches to meet real life needs within it. So bear with me. But all that really matters in the end is that there is a really good funding mechanism, and people are there to help you through the process and help the constituents through the process. So through EQIP, we also offer the Conservation Innovation Grants, or CIG program. So USDA hopes to continue to use the latest science, research, and conservation tools. We want to reduce the impacts of climate change by capitalizing on innovation. We put out a request for proposals each year, and to help for our partners to meet our conservation needs and help us learn new things and fill needs that we can't do. So it can be research or on-farm trials. In the past 2 years, NRCS invested $50 million in 30 on-farm trials projects across the nation, and these are all soil health, which is hugely important for the Great Lakes region. So those are some really good tools. It also has other grant proposals, not on-farm trials, but other research type projects. We have a project here you see from 2020 CIG award. The Ohio-based Rid-All Foundation is an urban farm and education center with a mission to improve the resiliency of ag producers in historically underserved communities. They teach courses in agroponics, they help agribusiness startups, and really teach that conservation in proponent of that. We have state grants that are a little bit lower. They generally max out at $200,000 each. And then we also offer a national component to that, which has larger, and they can go up to $2 million. Okay, so within EQIP, we also have what's called landscape initiatives. And there's national and regional and state initiatives. I want to discuss a little bit with you the National Water Quality Initiative. That is an initiative within EQIP. And so it's where NRCS works collaboratively with EPA and state partners to address water quality concerns in impaired watersheds. So we'll take a smaller watershed, and we at the state will submit proposals, and then they're nationally funded. So those funds come from national office that are directly in these watersheds and have to be used just in these watersheds. Some of the best projects that, and those are all we implement practices for water quality and water quantity. That's the goal of these. And like I said, I've worked in many different states. The best examples that I've seen of successful NWQI projects are, and again, evaluating those using those modeling results, are where other partners in industry are brought in. So everywhere there's regional water districts that know the value of clean water, there's soft drink companies, there's beer companies, there's a whole host of other industries and conservation districts that are out there. When those folks, so I'll be honest and admit that there's some statutory limitations to and those are there for a reason, and we want them to stay there. So there's some limitations. We can't do 100% of everything, but other folks, when we have a resource need that is really high, like in an impaired watershed or something to that effect, there's other partners that can come alongside and meet where we can't. So if some of those economics aren't there for whatever reason, or if there is some sort of barrier, it takes those partnerships to come in. And I'm aware of one particular watershed through NWQI that has really cleaned up that water, and the industries that utilize the water are finding that it is cheaper to clean up that water before it gets in the tank, if you will. So they can spend a whole lot less time and a whole lot less funding to clean that water to make their products. If they do that work and invest in that conservation ahead of time and clean that water before it gets into the stream where they're pulling it from. So it's partnerships we're always looking to identify partner and follow those products of the chain, invite those end players to the party to really meet. So that's one key aspect of NWQI, but really just targeting those funds for those impaired watersheds. watersheds. Another landscape conservation initiative is the GLRI, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And this is that larger area in darker blue that you see. It is used to accelerate the benefits of those voluntary conservation programs. So they are locally driven effort with partnerships to address those conservation goals that transcend all of those different state boundaries. So it's like a big region instead of a state-led. So through GLRA, you see that we've been able to put a whole host of contracts and financial assistance to help farmers implement conservation practices and cover a large bit of that landscape. And that is just through GLRI. It does not include other initiatives that are split out. So it's just targeted funding. It doesn't also include that locally led conservation within that, and those all overlap. So this is just funding that doesn't always try to tell people that it doesn't tell the whole story. It's not all that's being done. It's just an addition of a pot of funds for that specific, but there's a whole bunch of other hosts that plays into that as well. But it is successful. So God's country, it was brought up at the beginning that now I'm working in God's country. Well, apparently there's a God's country creamery in Ulysses, Pennsylvania, specifically in the Genesee River watershed. And we at NRCS have worked with them in technical and financial assistance. They are a multi-generational dairy farm, a creamery and cheesery, owned and operated by the Bachman family. They have put in a lot of water quality practices with NRCS's help. Waste storage facilities, waste transfer, nutrient management, critical area plantings. They've significantly reduced erosion and nutrient transport into the watershed. So we are so grateful for initiatives and for partnerships to be able to do that kind of work. All right, let's jump back to Ohio and Indiana and Michigan, where we have another regional initiative, the Western Lake Erie Basin. So it's an initiative in addition to the GLRI initiative, and it covers this 6 million acre watershed. And this is about the size of the watersheds that the SEEP results are going to be on, if that answers that question. So you're looking at, they're looking at different watersheds within watersheds. And I can also share some of those SEEP results with you guys, the whole full reports. We are waiting for the 2018 one, should be out the end of this year. The 2017 one is what we have now. So you can, there's a lag behind. But the land in this watershed is predominantly agriculture with a primary focus on soybeans, corn. It also has poultry and livestock and some pretty big operations. So we started this initiative in 2016 to focus on comprehensive conservation planning and add additional technical and financial resources. We're looking at suites of conservation practices to this targeted area and really those priority areas. They are working really hard to reduce the edge of field losses and improve water quality. So most of the practices, you can see the good work that's been done with quite a few contracts. We're $88.5 million, 755,000 acres in the basin. Most of that went to nutrient management and cover crops. And that basin, sorry about that. That basin drains, it's like 29 counties that drains into that shallow western third portion of Lake Erie. And it's been highly successful. So through WLEB, the initiative, per the SEEP results, so here's where you get to some of those specifics. It's showing that we've lost annual sediment, or we've improved annual sediment losses by 80%, annual nitrogen losses by 26%, and annual total phosphorus losses by 61%. Now that is the conservation practices versus no conservation practices. So if we know what those practices look like moving forward and how to plan accordingly and look at the highest successes and moving further in the future years. So this is Clint Rodabow and his family. He has put he bought this particular land, or their family bought this land in the WLEV watershed, and came to us because he had significant erosion. So we worked with him, taught him about water quality in the region, and he put grass waterways and a rock pad to stop some of that erosion directly into the watershed. Okay, so shifting gears outside of EQIP. So those were all EQIP initiatives and general initiatives. Let's move into conservation stewardship program. Though this is another financial assistance, and it's a great program. Just look at Jim Solicito, his face, it shows right there, right? He is a producer who participates, as well as I believe Carolyn or on this call also participates in, and we're grateful for that. So Jim owns a mix of ag lands. So it's a variety. It has shrublands, wetlands, forest land, and he is very, very interested in wildlife habitat. And he has put in a bunch of wildlife habitat stewardship efforts. So through CSP, he was able to focus on forest stand improvement, some more wildlife, and also in forest health and the soil health within that. He also put in a riparian forest zone buffer along a stream bank to improve that water quality and reduce that stream bank erosion, which is huge and a really good practice. So this can be a really good tool. It is different than EQIP. It is a long-term program. So EQIP, like I said, it was a one and done. You come in, you do your practice, you fix that, you're out of that contract. This is a long-term contract. So 5 years with an opportunity to renew at the end of for an additional 5 years. It's a competed renewal. But with CSP, we're taking producers who already have a good track record with conservation, either through EQIP or they've just done it on their own. They're already meeting a couple of resource concerns. They have fairly good minimum baseline threshold of conservation on their place now. And we're working with them. We give an annual base payment to kind of pay you. It's a little bit for what you're already doing to cover some operation and maintenance, be able to maintain some of that conservation level and reward that work, as well as try new things. So then we work with these producers on doing additional conservation activities and practices. So we could either take what they're already meeting and take it to a new level and really enhance some of those efforts, or we can bring in other resource concerns and meet additional resource concerns with that. It is a valuable, very valuable too. It is not as large of a program as EQIP. It is not meant for absolutely everybody, but where it fits, it is beautiful and really gets a lot of conservation work on the ground and longer term conservation work. And it's rewarding. The folks that participate find it rewarding. Okay, so we're going to jump back to EQIP. We have another subcomponent of EQIP, which was authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill. And I wanted to talk about it after CSP because it is very CSP-like. It is called the Conservation Incentive Contract Program. You may or may not have heard about it. We had some climate smart agriculture pilot projects with the CIC this year in some states, but it was very small. It will be fully offered in FY22, and it will we will have state-led priority areas, priority land uses, and be able to solve some conservation issues. Really looking forward to having another tool in the toolbox. So CIC provides both incentive practice payments for adopting practices, as well as enhancement payments for managing, maintaining, and improving those incentives during the contract. So it's a new opportunity for producers to implement conservation. It kind of blends EQIP and CSP. So it is longer term, like CSP, 5 years, but CSP, we expect folks to be the cream of the crop, if you will, they have their whole operation meets the conservation stewardship threshold level. With EQIP, we can take a portion of their land if they're in lock it up in longer term, five-year conservation. It's really good for things that may take a little bit longer to show results or implement and take a little bit more risk off the producers for things like soil health, climate smart ag. It can be really beneficial for small scale farmers and ranchers. So there's a lot of opportunities in a new tool to use there. Okay. We also offer easement programs to landowners who want to maintain or enhance their land in a way that is beneficial to ag and the environment. So we have ASEP, the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program. And through that, we provide financial and technical assistance to help conserve those agriculture lands and wetlands and their related benefits. Under ASEP, we have an agriculture land easements component, ALE, where we help Indian tribes, state, local governments, and non-governmental organizations protect ag lands to limit non-ag uses of the land. So we're keeping working lands working is the goal there, keeping green things, no development, that kind of thing. Under the wetland reserve easements, WRE component of ASEP, we help to restore, protect, and enhance those enrolled wetlands. So there's no farming of those. We're restoring those wetlands to their nutrient filtering, nutrient storing capacity. And those are all for 30 years or perpetuity. Okay, this is the last program, so bear with me. RCPP, Regional Conservation Partnership Program. It is aimed at improving water quality, soil health, wildlife habitat, you name it, resource concerns. It is a great program and a good tool for partner and collaborative work. There is an RFP that goes out each year for proposals for partners to submit. It can include land management, so think conservation practices, a lot of the stuff we just talked about. It could include easements. It can include land rental payments, so think payments for taking land out of production and maybe covering it with wildlife, pollinator, or water quality, nutrient removal system type work. Watershed, flood controls type structures. RCPP is very flexible. And the great thing about RCPP is that where I believe what we do is great. And I really believe in our mission, and I think NRCS does awesome work. Partners sometimes have specific needs or can take things to another level. And this is a way to do that and collaborate with us to do that. So RCPP allows for some flexibility in implementation versus our policies. So with our other programs too, we get annual funding budgets. So all of those initiatives, we get an annual budget with our locally led process and our state technical committees. We have that annual process, but with RCPP, these projects are guaranteed for 5 years. So we have that guaranteed financial assistance in that particular geographic location identified for that targeted objective. So if you run into a snag in year one, you don't lose that annual funding. You have future years, and you know that that funding is there for that targeted resource for 5 years. And then at the end of that 5 years, the project, the sponsors can compete for a renewal if they so desire. In the Great Lakes region alone, we have 13 dynamic partnerships. I'm going to cover just a couple of those so you can know the type of projects that we have going out there, and then we'll move on. This is the Wisconsin Farmland Protection Partnership Project, which scales up farmland protection efforts. They are focused on targeting funding to areas that have been underserved by easement funding in the past. It's a partnership of 18 entities that have come together to protect at least 5,000 acres and help create large acres of preserved ag land and help mitigate the high number of farm bankruptcies which happen in Wisconsin while allowing increased adoption of conservation practices on that protected land. Huge projects. So the Lake Erie Conservation Partnership also, Lori, yes?
Lori, we're down to 4 minutes. It's 11.
Okay. Okay.
I have two questions. The one we didn't back to, what is the watershed scale?
Okay, that I answered with the, it looks like this. This is the watershed scale that the SEEPs are on, the WLEB. type.
So
that scale
could involve multiple counties and even multiple states.
Yes, it's on a watershed basis.
And you named EQIP, CSP, RCPP. They said that a lot of these. Is there a 1 or 2 page summary somewhere that we could have that explained what each of these were? Is there a dictionary?
Yes, there is. We have fact sheets on everything. So yes, I know it gets super complicated. So yes, I can send that out.
And then the question is, 6 million acres appears to be huge scale. Is that typical of some of the programs that there actually are 6 million acres? It
depends. Okay, are you talking about you're talking about for the WLEB initiative is 6 million acres.
Karen Morgan, can you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, it appears to be a Huck 6. Is that right? Rather than a huge Huck?
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
Don't quote me on the numbers, but yeah, it is a very large, but there's the sub watersheds within that. So keep in mind that that's the funding boundary, and then that's that watershed boundary, right? So it's looking at everything that's draining into that, but we have the sub components within that. So each of the counties has an office and is working separately, but together collaboratively.
We're working at the Huck 8, so I understand, working at that large scale. I was just wanting to know what you were considering, a watershed scale. So it appears you're considering a Huck 6.
Right. And it also varies. It just varies depending on what you're looking at and what, so if you're looking at initiative, that may be different than if you're looking at modeling. And then there's the sub watersheds that are modeled within those larger models. So it gets super complicated.
Yep. I appreciate that. That's why I asked the question. Thank you.
Yeah. And we're not stuck on those watershed levels for funding. That just happens to be the most effective for that particular initiative. We have a whole host of the NWQI, for example, is on a Huck 12. We'll take 7 Huck 12s. So they're just different depending on what we're trying to do. And I know I'm out of time, so if there's any more questions, but as far as, go ahead.
If Todd Brennan, would you please unmute yourself and you can ask a question when she finishes?
I'm going to skip a lot. So I just give me 5 seconds. So I just want to say real quick that we do have a real need for partnerships, but we also need to consider these big resources, but we also need to consider those local. So it's on a multiple scale things. We need our partners to layer those, but we've got to keep in mind our customers. So the more money money's great. You guys all need money and our constituents need money and we need money to solve these problems, but we've got to do it realistically. So we're not layering program after program and that we keep our customers in mind. So we need a lot strategic planning, not just from an NRCS perspective, but with NRCS and all of us. So that's what we're trying to do through our state technical advisory committees. We're open to learning more for you all. We want all the programs in a certain resource area. The goal would be that they would be simple, streamlined, and not conflicting so that we don't end up losing funds, federal funds or state funds in a local area because of competition, if that makes sense. And I can talk more about that at another time. So, Mr. Bachman.
Yeah. Hi, Lori. Todd Brennan. Sorry, and thank you so much. This has been really great. You covered a lot of ground in that amount of time, so I appreciate it. I was just curious to clarify. This actually wasn't my question, but you showed the image when we were talking about SEEP, the image of the entire Maumee Basin, and from what I have looked at in SEEP, they rarely seem to ever cover a watershed of that size. It's usually smaller watersheds within, like much smaller. So I was just curious, is SEEP actually doing a study of the entire Maumee Basin?
So SEEP there is a Western Lake Erie Basin SEEP team that does that study. And that one is on that basin that I showed you.
Okay.
They do different. It depends on the region and what they're looking at, how large, but most of them are smaller scale. Yes.
Do you have the person that sort of oversees that, or that, we could see what the reports are?
Absolutely. And we can send you the report. So yes, definitely. We will send you, I'll get it to Carolyn, and Carolyn can transmit that. But we have the report, like I said, from 2017 that we will share, and I will also send you the contact information, and then hopefully we'll get the 2018 report soon.
Okay, great. Thanks. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know if we're at time, but I had another question, just sort of trying to explain to me RCPP. Maybe you finally explain it, because I've been wondering this for a while. It always appeared to me as just a way of just repackaging the same programs. But you had mentioned maybe about your budget cycle, that yours renews sort of set annually. Maybe I'm getting this wrong. And that the RCPP is a way of just sort of securing longer term funding. So I guess I've always tried to figure out, like, what's the value of RCPP? It seems more like who you can bring to the table to match funds versus like the funds that come from you. But maybe I have that wrong.
You're right. It's both. The way, and that's my perspective of it, is that strategic planning part of it, whenever you're trying to target something that is of interest in the resource area, geographical resource area. But it is also a way to bring partners to the table and match that, leverage those, come together and collaborate. And then it has a little bit more flexibility than our regulatory programs, or not regulatory, but our regular covered programs, the EQIP and the CSP, watershed, and those things, easements. So we can flex a little bit of things in that and maybe tie them down a little bit tighter to meet a resource need. And we can also, negotiate some of that with the partner when we go into those agreements. And they can do a lot of the work for us.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lori. We'll get all that posted, and also I can send it directly to all the participants today, because we have all their emails. So we can send it to them, as well as post it on both the website, and the websites that it's posted on are listed in the chat. So,
okay.
Representative,
I'll send it to you.
Carolyn, can you hear me?
You're fine. Representative Abbott has lost his screen, but we can see him fine and we can hear him fine. But he's flying blind, so we're just going to pretend he can see us, although we can all see him fine.
Okay, thank you. I'm back.
You want to take us home, David?
Yeah, are we ready to close?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, Jennifer or Lori, thank you so much for the presentation. That was a very detailed, in-depth discussion on all the funding and programs that are available. I just think that you've done a great job. It gave us something to think about. It's obvious there's a lot of programs, and some can be very confusing. Quite a bit of funds available. So I think it's important that we keep all these in mind as we build on water incentives in our states. I hope you continue to do the good work. And I would think that if we have more questions, that our participants can reach out to Carolyn or myself, and we can get through to you if you can answer any more of the questions, especially how we can drill down in our local communities and make those contacts with our local NCRS to get more information. Maybe some bullet points would be very helpful. Thank you again for being here. In closing, I just want to also thank our sponsorships. Without them, we are not able to do what we do, and that is the Joyce Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, and Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation. We greatly appreciate their support we received from these three foundations and their recognition that state and provincial legislators are vital stakeholders to engage in the policy-making process. With that, we are in conclusion. We've just gone a little bit over our 1 hour. I apologize, but I think it was a very well attended presentation, and we thank everyone for attending. And with that, we will close. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Abbott. Thank you, everyone. We will send you the material.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Lori.